Question. Hi Kim. I hope this message finds you well. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude for your guidance and teachings. I've been on the spiritual path for about 6 years, and I came to know you 3 years ago. Since then, I have sincerely applied your teachings, and I've noticed deep progress. For that, I'm truly thankful. I feel that I'm more at peace now, with fewer attachments and expectations from people or from life. However, deep within me, there's a sadness I cannot seem to understand. When I sit quietly with myself, I often find tears coming, and I feel heartbroken without knowing the reason. On the outside, I have a good life, a loving husband and stability in many ways. Yet for the past 6 months, this feeling of heartbreak and loneliness has been present. I have waited and observed, hoping that something from my subconscious might reveal itself, but nothing clear has come. I would be deeply grateful if you could help me see the possible reasons behind this and guide me on how to approach it. Well, in general, I would say, as you probably realize if you watched some of my videos, that it comes from a subconscious self, a separate self, that were created in a past life. And therefore you need to use the teachings and tools the Masters have given to try and uncover that. I would say it sounds to me like this relates to what the Masters call the cosmic burst trauma, which is when we first came to Earth. The Masters have explained that Earth is an unnatural planet that was in the process of self-destruction, and as part of turning the planet around, there was a number of beings who came from natural planets, where we don't have this self-destructive spiral, and volunteered to come to Earth, or hold a certain balance for Earth. And as a result of taking embodiment here, often being attacked by certain dark beings that Master called the fallen beings, I explain all this in my video about how the world was created. We received this trauma, this cosmic burst trauma, when we first came embodiment on Earth. And we also often felt ignored by the original inhabitants of the Earth that we came here to help. So what I would say is, there's especially one book called Healing Your Spiritual Traumas that relates to this. Now the person might already have used this. But to me, it sounds like you came to Earth, you had a certain expectation before coming here. I certainly realized that in myself. Before coming to Earth, we have certain expectations of what's going to happen here. It's a little different for each one of us. My expectation, for example, was I was going to be the prince on a white horse who rode into town and saved the day and helped all the people overcome suffering. And that I would be welcomed here. And that obviously didn't happen. So for you who's asking the question, or for whoever is watching this, it may be individual what it was for you, depending on what expectation you had. But when we were faced with this loss, this trauma, that expectation, the bubble burst. It was shattered. And we realized, and I can log into that myself, that we realized, oh, not only isn't it going to happen the way we're hoping it was happen, but we realized that our expectation was completely unrealistic. I mean, it's completely naive. I think probably my reaction was, Kim, how could you be that stupid? I probably didn't call myself Kim back then, but anyway, how could you be that stupid? That was just my reaction. Yours could be different. But it was this sense that something had been irretrievably lost that could never be recaptured. It was like, what happened in the birth trauma was the fallen beings did something to us that made us feel like we could never fulfill our mission on Earth. And it was just an overwhelming sense of loss. And I sense, my sense of it is that the person describing as this deep sadness is this sadness of this sense of loss. And I felt this in myself. As I said, I first started working on this idea of the birth trauma back in 2017. So I had stages where I was going through this, but I also dealt with this sense of loss. And I don't think I felt it exactly the same way. We're all a little bit different, but I certainly dealt with it. And I think for me, the first reaction I had to it was that because I've been on this spiritual path for a long time, the person says I've been on the spiritual path for 6 years, and I followed these specific teachings for 3 years. But I had been on the path for longer, so I had worked through a lot of psychology, and I'd given up a lot of things already. And I had experienced that when I give up something, I actually feel more free. So because of that, the sadness, I definitely experienced it, but it wasn't as overwhelming for me. And that, of course, doesn't help the person, I understand, but I'm just trying to work through in my mind how I dealt with this. So this is one thing, it wasn't quite as overwhelming. So I could look at this sadness as just any other thing that comes up in the psychology. And I think maybe if you are feeling this sadness too, you can try and shift and realize it's just a psychological condition. And it comes from a separate self. It's ultimately unreal. No matter how overwhelming it feels, it's ultimately unreal. And that the way out of it is to shift and see that. And then for me, the next phase was this. It took me some time to deal with the birth trauma. But then I started looking at what caused the birth trauma? What caused my reaction to Earth? And it was my expectation. The expectation I had before I came was what caused my reaction to Earth. And then I started realizing that it was because my expectation was unrealistic. It was simply unrealistic. Because I didn't fully understand how difficult of an environment Earth is. And at first I started thinking, well, were you stupid for not realizing this? And then I gradually worked through that and realized that, how could I have known? I mean, really, how could you know until you experienced it? The environment on Earth is so different from a natural planet. And here you have, you started out on a natural planet, you only experienced a natural planet, and you can't really imagine how different it is on Earth. You just can't imagine. It's sometimes you just have to experience it to know what it's like. And So I actually come to a point where I realized that what caused me to decide to embody on Earth was this, the basic characteristic that had driven my entire existence on a natural planet. And it was, I was always willing to grow. I was always willing to come up higher. I was always willing to improve myself and look at myself. And therefore, I really thought, how bad could it be on an unnatural planet? How bad could it be? Surely I must be able to get out of this, to deal with this, to grow from this. And so what I realized at some point was that when I received this birth trauma, when I felt this sense of loss, irretrievable loss, the shock was really not due to what happened here on Earth. The shock was really that I started doubting myself. Could I get out of this condition here on earth? Could I grow from this? Could I transcend this? I started doubting that because it was such a shock. And at first it felt like, but how can you ever overcome this? And then what I realized here just a few years ago is that it was like I realized, first of all, everything that has happened on earth is ultimately unreal. It's not permanent. I'm in an unascended sphere. I explained this in How the World Was Created. I'm in an unascended sphere. Nothing is permanent. Nothing can really affect my conscious you or my I'm presence. So, ultimately, no matter how traumatic it felt to receive this birth trauma, it still doesn't define me. And that means that I, the conscious you, yes, I can actually overcome anything and everything that happened to me on earth. I can actually transcend it. And I can do it the same way with the birth trauma as I do with anything else, any other aspects of psychology. I have to come to see that it's an illusion, and I consciously decide to let it go. I just let it go. And you can say, does that help the person? Well, probably not in the short run, but what I would say is, keep working on this birth trauma. I don't know if the person has used that book, Healing Your Spiritual Traumas, but otherwise do that. Otherwise try it again, do it again, work through it again. And seek to come to this, that the sadness comes from this sense of loss, which was really your expectation for coming to earth that was lost. But since that expectation, it was based on an illusion, it really wasn't a loss. It's freeing yourself. And you don't need to blame yourself for having your expectation based on an illusion because, as I said, how could you know? How could we know before we came here? In other words, we could have a certain intellectual understanding of an unnatural planet, but how could we know how we would react to an unnatural planet? How could I have known how I, given the being I was on a natural planet, how I would react to an unnatural planet? And by coming here and experience my reaction, I've actually learned something about myself that can help me grow, become more aware of who I am, and transcend. And I can really transcend anything that happened on earth and turn it into a positive learning experience. And that's what I've been working on ever since, and that's what all of us have the potential to work on, and the Masters have given us the tools and teachings for accomplishing that. So I would say to this person, keep applying the tools and the teachings, and just be a little patient with yourself, because there's just something you haven't seen yet. There's a shift that hasn't happened, but as you keep working on it, you will move closer and closer to that shift, and one day it's just going to all come into focus, and you're going to see the unreality of it. And that's when you can let it go and really accept that it was just an experience you went through. It didn't change you fundamentally in a negative way. You learned from it, never you grew from it.